So let's try to dig into the psychology of what's going on between Saudi Arabia and Russia here. Only last week they were talking to each other about production cuts, and then we end up with an oil price war. What's going on between these two antagonists?
Yeah, Russia's been invited since 2016 into the OPEC Plus meetings. Of course, Russia's not a member of OPEC, but it's been cooperating with many of the OPEC producers, which still don't dominate the market. They're a very healthy share. And of course, a country like Saudi Arabia is one of the largest producers and does, of course, have a lot of volume in terms of being a swing producer. So that's basically inventory that it's able to put on market very quickly. And Russia, up until I would say January, seemed as though it was cooperating. And then we've had a number of months now where there's been back and forth discussions between Putin of Russia and MBS and Mohammed bin Salman, that's the de facto leader of Saudi Arabia, about whether or not Russia is going to sign on to these continued kind of production quotas. And Russia said, forget it. The only beneficiaries out of this is basically U.S. shale producers, who are the ones that are really benefiting out of having all this excess supply out of the market. So the Saudis basically said, well, we'll basically flood the market with all this supply that we have stocked up in inventory, and we'll effectively start a price war. And that's exactly what we saw with Brent and WTI reaching as low as $35 a barrel yesterday.
Yeah, the U.S. shale play here and that angle fascinates me as the true antagonists in the room, that Russia's simply saying, you know what, forget it. We're not going to play this game anymore. Because the U.S. shale producers in Saudi Arabia, I don't know if we should go as far to say they had an understanding, but they definitely didn't seem to be at each other's throats.
No, but I think, specifically the Russians, they don't want to see the Americans benefiting out of this. And that's basically the way they interpreted this continued cooperation. They saw, as many of us see, the global economy is cooling down, certainly since January. COVID had taken form in parts of China. So we knew that there was going to be a slowing down of the global economies as far back as then. And so the Russians' calculation here is that if they take a hit, they're going to basically be effectively supporting the shale producers to profit at their expense. And that's something they just weren't prepared to do. But of course, I think, unfortunately, it was a bold move, and maybe even a mistaken one, by both the Saudis and the Russians, because I think they underestimated how troubled and shaky the entire global economy feels at this moment with the COVID scare. So it's really the last time to play this game with the anxiety and fears on everybody's mind, and the markets pretty much reacted as you would expect under these circumstances.
Now, in a game of brinkmanship like this, you're waiting for one side to blink. From the Saudi Arabia side, how long can they dig into an oil price war? What does their foreign currency reserve situation look like? Because ultimately, they sell oil to the world. They need to buy goods from the world as well.
Yeah, well, and also don't forget their currency is really pegged to the dollar, so they're pretty much giving up their monetary policy to the Feds. I would say their reserves are relatively healthy. Certainly, there's been a lot of debates on who could outstand the other between the Russians and the Saudis, and we've seen a lot of bravado statements coming out of both sides. We've heard the Russians come out and say that they could last up to 10 years at $20 a barrel. Suggesting that they're in it for the long game. The Saudis similarly saying that they have there's no rush as far as they're concerned, and their budgets are healthy and the reserves are healthy. So everybody's really playing this game of chicken, I would call it. And it really, unfortunately, comes to two autocrats, Putin and MBS, that frankly both, again, these are pretty much state-owned societies and oil companies that they direct indirectly, and neither of them want to sort of bow to the other. And so there's a lot of, again, brinkmanship, chicken, call it what you will, but it's egos at play here. And unfortunately, it's the consumers globally that are getting caught in the middle, particularly if you think about the stock market.
Now, in Canada, we talk about oil being at these levels, and Russia's saying we don't sweat it. Saudi Arabia saying we don't sweat it, we sweat it. Alberta, in particular, even the national books, when they're looking at West Texas Intermediate assumptions. Is there anything Canada can do in this, or are we just too small of a player?
We are a bit too small. Certainly, I mean, you've heard some analysts suggest that, we're far more resilient in the oil sands than people assume us to be. And that, the sunk costs were high, but there are many producers today that are going to be okay and will be turning a profit even at 35. And now we've seen prices go up to almost 40, that somehow, we'll be okay in all this. I don't think that's a very safe argument. It's a very interdependent economy, and that kind of brinkmanship is not good for anybody. So I don't think it's healthy for Canada. Certainly, I think we've got a lot on our plate with just, again, back to the overall loss of confidence in the global economy and the underpinning of it being so interdependent at a time when everybody's being told to basically stop that interdependency for this COVID virus. We're really in, I think, a very, a pickle, if you will.
Now, the rest of the OPEC member countries aren't in Saudi Arabia's position. I can't imagine they are too pleased. If this was a protracted oil price battle between these two giants, would that spell the end of OPEC? I imagine the other members are saying, don't we get a say in this?
Yeah, absolutely. And don't forget here, some of the big players of OPEC, like Iran, have basically been sidelined effectively by the sanctions that the Americans have put back in place on oil exports out of Iran. So that takes out a very big producer. Iraq is next in line. They are very much suffering. They have their own domestic troubles. They certainly need the resources. They're extremely dependent. They don't have the kind of mixed economy that perhaps the Russians have. They're wholly dependent on imports and need oil exports in order to bring that hard currency. So it's a very different situation in different countries. Other big players, Venezuela, even Libya, are pretty much just trickling onto the market. So there is a lot of opportunity, frankly, for Saudi Arabia to play a very big game in OPEC at the moment. But it certainly does make one wonder how effective OPEC will be in a market where there are so many players outside of OPEC. Canada, certainly the United States being a very big player, and now the Russians.
It's always great to get your thoughts on these matters. Thanks for joining us, Bessma.
Thank you.
That was Bessma Momani, professor at the University of Waterloo and non-resident fellow at the Arab Gulf States Institute.